right, Jim Eagle, I need you to fire up the curmudgeon access media shill-o-meter, because we got some work to do. Quote, in a universe that often feels suffocated by the amount of history-dense storytelling and character awareness needed to enjoy these films, director Nia DaCosta figures out how to handle all of that in one of the most fun Marvel films in years. It's kind of a marvel. Ross Boname, Collider.com. Quote, powered by the unstoppable trio of Larson, Paris, and Villani, The Marvels is 3 times the thrill and the franchise's best effort since Spider-Man couldn't find his way home. And if you're a man offended by women-led action films, I don't know what to tell you, other than please stay off YouTube and get help. Joey Morona, ironic name alert, Cleveland Plain Dealer. Quote, Larson, Paris, and Villani have a natural and infectious rapport. Their undeniable chemistry anchors one of the strongest threads of the Marvels, which wrestles with Carol's isolation and ego. Larson is steadier in this installment of the Captain Marvel franchise. Her toughness and stoicism, which felt clumsy and alienating in the first film, have a more intentional edge here because they're accompanied by a deeper understanding of her character. Lovia Giarki, Hollywood Reporter. Quote, The Marvels is a triumph. Its depth can be seen not just through its characters, but through its story, as it explores war's complicated fallout, the difficulty of being a human when you are perceived as a monolith, and the hilarious and complicated virtues of family. Both funny and heartfelt, Nia DaCosta's MCU debut will have you asking when she and her leading ladies are coming back immediately after the credits roll. Amelia Emberwing, IGN.com. Quote, The Marvels is that rare superhero adventure seemingly tailor-made for cat lovers. Body-swapping shenanigans, and those who live for jubilant song and dance numbers. Brian Truitt, USA Today. Quote, The Marvels is a return to form for the MCU with all the goofy fun and superhero hijinks of Marvel's best fare. The Marvels is an uproariously fun and action-packed comic book movie that's made all the more delightful by the heartwarming dynamic of the leads. Molly Freeman, ScreenRant.com. Quote, The Marvels is a celebration of sisterhood, with 3 women of different generations and backgrounds coming together to save the universe. This powerful message will resonate with young girls who are looking for role models to look up to. Kathia Woods, Philadelphia Tribune. Quote, The Marvels is the MCU's best movie in years. The film excels by separating itself from MCU lore, shortening the runtime, and leaning on humor and heart. Matthew Huff, Parade Magazine. Quote, It hits like the summer popcorn blockbusters we want from Marvel, full of earnest emotion and enthusiasm with a cool, straightforward sci-fi story and plenty of unique action spectacle, and sporting a charming cast with terrific chemistry. All right, is that enough or should we keep going? I think that's probably enough, frankly. And I think this is a sufficient setup for what comes next, so let's go ahead and hit the damn music. From high atop the battlements of Castle Curmudgeon, currently ranked by TripAdvisor as the number 3 no plumbing, no electricity, authentically medieval bed and breakfast in all of Southern California. Good evening, Mr. and Mrs. America, and all ships at sea. Welcome to the program. I am your eponymous host and humble servant. And in case it wasn't screamingly obvious enough, those shill-tastic blurbs I just read out, they were all from pre-release reviews of The Marvels, which, for those fans keeping score at home, has finished its theatrical run. Yes, you heard right. It's being pulled from the theaters after 27 days. As not just the lowest growing picture in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, and by a fairly wide margin, but very nearly the lowest grossing picture in the entire history of Marvel Studios. Which means we're going all the way back to 1996. And if I'm reading the numbers correctly, there are only 2 Marvel movies that have ever grossed less than the Marvels. And Jim Eagle, I want you to be ready on the rim shot button because we may need it. Which 2 are they? Elektra and the second god-awful Nicolas Cage Ghost Rider movie. Yes, the one where he pisses fire. The one they had to shoot in the ass end of Eastern Europe because the budget was about $18.75. The one Idris Elba's been furiously trying to scrub from his filmography for the last 12 years. To put it another way, the Marvels face-planted so hard, so historically, it made even less than the Ben Affleck Daredevil movie. It didn't clear $100 million domestic or $200 million worldwide on a production budget of $275 million, which doesn't include marketing and promotion, which is typically twice again the production budget. So long story short, this thing has basically lost the studio a minimum of around $350 million. It had the worst opening in MCU history, then it followed that up with the biggest second week drop-off. And think about what an improbably auspicious achievement that is. The biggest drop-off from the worst opening. It opens to $46 million, then it immediately drops by 87% from that tiny number. And just, wow. So it's not difficult to see, unless you're some dumb woketard who can't do basic arithmetic unless you're counting made-up genders, why the studio is yanking this thing out of the theaters after less than 4 weeks. Because you can't leave a movie in wide release when it's pulling less than $1 million a day. Wide release means 2,000 screens. $1 million a day is $500 per day per screen. A 103-minute film means you can screen it 5 or 6 times per day. That means The Marvels is currently playing to an average of 5 paying customers per showing. I think we need another rim shot, Jim Eagle. Thank you. He's not the best producer in the business for nothing, folks. So juxtapose all of that 20-car pileup inside a 5-alarm dumpster fire, with all those fawningly obsequious quotes you just heard from the woke activist reviewers back in the open. And if the sheer incongruity of it all causes you to wonder just how the hell that happens, well, let's take a trip back in time and I'll explain it for you. See, for the first 70 or 80 years of the movie business, if you wanted people to write pre-release reviews and get the word out about your picture, you held a press/VIP screening. Ideally, you would have your director and your lead actors on hand to answer a few questions afterward. You'd get some good reviews and you would get some bad reviews. Even if the picture was total dog shit, you would still get some good reviews because dishonest, shill film reviewers, let's face it, it's not a new thing. Sure, you might be left with no self-respect and your professional reputation in tatters, but you know what you get in return? You get your name and the name of the publication you write for on a lot of movie posters and a lot of newspaper ads and a lot of magazine ads. There used to be shill movie critics who carved out 50-year-long careers just by churning out positive blurbs for terrible movies. But right around the turn of the 21st century, the advent of the DVD era, the studios decided, you know what? We can save the expense of these private screenings by just sending each reviewer a DVD of the film. It'll be great. And it was great. Right up until everybody started having high-speed internet and the DVD screeners started showing up on all the torrent sites. They tried to fix it by individually watermarking each DVD and various other things, but the torrenters always found a way to defeat it, so eventually they had to go back to doing it the old-fashioned way by holding private screenings for the press and also another newer cohort called influencers. But here's what changed. Back in the day, pre-2000s, you didn't get any free stuff for going to a press screening. If you wanted a popcorn and a soda and some Milk Duds, you damn well went to the snack bar and paid for it. But when the studios were forced to bring back the old-fashioned private press screening model, they said, let's not do this the way we used to do it. Let's start bribing the shit out of these people with giant bags of free merch. Let's make them feel like they owe us something, namely a favorable review. And let's make it very abundantly clear that if you don't play ball and say good things about our picture, well, there ain't going to be any more private screenings or any giant bags of merch in your future, buddy. So why are there so many self-described journalists who are so willing to blow smoke up the ass of bad filmmakers who make terrible films? Well, there it is. There you go. So to be sure, there's been a shift in what motivates shill reviewers to write shill-tastic reviews for shitty movies, but there's been another big shift too. And that's the explosion of ideologically driven political activist movie reviewers. People for whom the only measure of a film's quality is how well it comports with their own political worldview. If it meets my standards for diversity, inclusion, and representation, then it's a good picture and I like it. Otherwise, it's hateful right-wing trash and I think it should be banned. Which brings us neatly along to Lady Ballers. Quote, it's racist, sexist, transphobic, and anti-Semitic, and there's really no debating that. It's also so amateurish in its visual execution, a happy Madison Stoner Happy Madison? That looks like a Merchant Ivory production in comparison. Anyone looking for a coherent and logical conservative point of view on transgender issues won't find it here. The movie is an enraged, disdainful, and mean-spirited free-for-all that flips all the same worn-out lib triggers in an attempt to put progressives into a foamy rage. John Serba, Decider.com. Quote, a groaning 110 minutes of agenda in search of a laugh, Lady Bullers is an anti-woke transphobic comedy from the conservative media site Daily Wire, an impotent exercise in attempted punching down at the groups hate groups love to hate. It's a litmus test for fellow travelers. If you're laughing, it's just that they're hating on the same people you hate on, because it's not funny. It's just ugly. Roger Moore, who dishonors the name Roger Moore, frankly, from Roger's Movie Nation. Now, it's pretty difficult to find reviews of Lady Ballers from people who have actually seen the movie, because the only way to see it, unless you acquired it piratically, is by buying a membership to Daily Wire Plus. But that hasn't stopped the whole cavalcade of rage-gasming Wokester douchebags from doing the same thing Wokesters always do when they don't like a thing. Namely, throwing all their toys out of the crib and crying hysterically until mother comes along to change their nappy. And some of them, at least to their credit, are honest and forthright enough to volunteer the fact that they've only seen the trailer and not the actual film that they're purporting to review. Not a majority by any means, but hey, it's something, I guess. Oh, and since they are Wokesters, and Wokesters like to paint from a decidedly limited intellectual palate, they have already built up a shadowy right-wing conspiracy theory about this film that nobody ever would have heard of who doesn't watch Daily Wire content on a regular basis. This is all right-wing review bombing, they squeal. But wait, I hear you say, don't they usually scream about review bombing when some woke garbage movie doesn't get a sufficiently high audience score that they think it should? Well, yes they do. But now it turns out that right-wing review bombing conspiracies are a two-way street, and who the hell knew? You see, the Wokesters simply cannot accept that this picture really has a legitimate 97% audience score on Rotten Tomatoes. And if the Wokesters don't like a thing, there is only one possible explanation, and that's a full-on right-wing reverse review bombing conspiracy, goddammit. Don't believe me? Headline: Lady Baller's Rotten Tomatoes page flooded with 5-star reviews amid backlash from LGBTQ plus community. Decider.com. Headline: Daily Wire's wildly unfunny anti-trans movie has a 95% user rating on Rotten Tomatoes. Them.com. There's actually a website called them.com. Jesus Christ. Now look, I don't want to interrupt all the rage-gasming and conspiracy mongering because frankly that stuff is funnier than any movie could ever be, but I still feel impelled to ask. Guys? You do realize this is a film that's only being viewed by existing Daily Wire members and people who bought a Daily Wire membership specifically so they could watch it? So wouldn't it stand to reason that it would have a viewer score in the mid to high 90th percentile? Bueller? And if there are any Wokesters watching this right now, and I know there are, I know what you're screaming at your computer screen. Shut up, you racist, transphobic, bigot monster. Now, if you watched The Blast Radius on Sunday, live 8 Eastern, 5 Pacific, you already know most of my thoughts on Lady Ballers, but if you didn't, and don't let it happen again, here's a brief summation. I've heard quite a few people on YouTube say this picture is an attempt at recreating the kind of dude bro comedies that were all the rage in the early to mid 2000s, but I don't think that's quite right. Why? Well, this picture features no sex, no nudity. I don't think it's even got any profanity. There's no gross-out humor beyond a dude having a couple of tampons up his nose. In other words, it doesn't really feature any of the things that defined and characterized the aforementioned dude bro early 2000s comedies. And as far as the aesthetic and technical aspects of the presentation, I think it's got more in common with early period Kevin Smith than anything else, which is to say, you can tell it was written and directed and acted by people who are not necessarily professional filmmakers and don't pretend to be. If anything, I would describe it as a 21st century conservative version of Clerks, but with a budget of $7 million instead of $30,000, which, when you factor in Biden inflation, it might be the exact same amount of money as a practical matter. Now, would the movie be better if it was made by a real studio and a real director and a real screenwriter and professional actors? Well, of course it would. But that just is not an option in the woke Hollywood era. The whole industry is so ideologically driven now, so totally hidebound by loony left-wing politics that you just can't make comedy movies anymore. And that's really a hell of a damn shame, and it has real consequences for the society and the culture at large, because comedy and comedians are supposed to provide one of the guardrails that provides a check and a balance when the people in charge totally lose their minds and start doing crazy, absurd things. Comedians mock them, people laugh at the jokes, and the people doing the crazy, absurd things say, I don't like being laughed at, so maybe I will change my behavior. But that guardrail is well and truly gone now. Should it fall to a place like the Daily Wire to make this movie? No, it should not. That it does signifies a fairly serious problem. This movie should have been made 6, 8, 10 years ago by a major studio, and it should have made $1 billion goddamn dollars at the box office, because there is nothing more crazy and absurd than the notion that a grown-ass man can transmogrify himself into a woman just by wishing it so and putting on ladies' clothes and reciting a couple of magic incantations. And the craziness and absurdity increases exponentially when you tell that grown-ass man that he's now allowed to compete in girls' and women's sports, and nobody's allowed to complain about it or laugh at it, or else they run the risk of being excluded from polite society and branded a hateful, awful bigot. In the year of my birth, 1974, the Western had been the dominant cinematic genre in Hollywood for the last 40 or 50 years. And then along comes a filmmaker named Mel Brooks and a picture called Blazing Saddles. And not only did it poke fun at how formulaic and predictable the Western genre had become, it also poked fun at the stupidity of racial prejudice. And on both scores, it had a profoundly positive effect on the society and the culture, even though it killed Western movies dead for a good long time. After Blazing Saddles, no Western appeared in the top 10 box office list until all the way in 1985, when Clint Eastwood came along with Pale Rider. And nobody ever made a Western movie again that was done in the same style that Westerns had been done prior to Blazing Saddles. Comedians and satirists and parody artists force us to hold up a mirror to ourselves and to laugh at what we see, even if the laughter makes us uncomfortable. But that is all gone now. There's only one group you're allowed to make jokes about today, and it's white male heterosexuals. The most ridiculous people and the most absurd things are off limits, totally verboten. The artistic cultural Marxism that prevails in the film industry today, it's almost enough to make the Soviet Union blush. And Blazing Saddles isn't the only example. After Mel Brooks killed the Western genre dead by making fun of it for the whole second half of the 1970s, it was all about disaster films. Airport, The Towering Inferno, Earthquake, and all the sequels and imitations that those pictures spawned. And what happens in 1980? A little picture called Airplane comes along. And the audience, in between laughing themselves nearly into a coma, says, yeah, they're right. That whole disaster film genre really has run its course, hasn't it? And the disaster film genre pretty much ceased to exist overnight. In the late 90s, the early 2000s, you had those teen, young adult horror movies that were all the rage. What comes along to kill those dead? The Scary Movie franchise. You couldn't get any of these pictures made today. Because not only has Hollywood become intellectually captive to its own wacky political ideologies, but it's also lost any and all willingness to poke fun at its own excesses, even when there are potentially huge amounts of money to be made in doing that. And so you wind up with a film industry in which every picture costs $200 goddamn million to make, if not more, and is a total piece of shit that nobody asked for and nobody wants to see. Would a young Mel Brooks even have a career in Hollywood today? Or a young Dave and Jerry Zucker? Hell no, they wouldn't. They would never get a script greenlit in a million billion years. And so it falls to non-filmmaker political commentators to make the comedy movies that Hollywood should have been making for the last half decade or more. And the Wokesters? Well, they probably see this all as a good and proper thing, to the detriment of all us normal people who don't want anything different than we wanted 50 years ago, namely, to laugh at stupid people who do self-evidently absurd things. Thanks very much indeed for watching. Have a great day and a pleasant tomorrow. See you next time. Do not comply. Get off my lawn.